My name is TJ Ortenzi, and I work in social media here at the Post. We've got Kimberly Kindy. Hello.
Hi.
Dan Keating.
Hello.
And Craig Holman.
Hello. How are you doing?
Hey. John, are you there? Okay, maybe not. So, Kimberly, where did the capital assets project begin?
Oh, wow. Where did it begin? That's a good question. Well, we started over a year ago, and we actually did a scrub of all 535 members, taking a look at what they do disclose about their assets, and then looking at how that might potentially intersect with their legislative duties. And from that scrub, which no one's ever done before, we started keying in on certain areas. We did our first project about earmarks, the biggest piece of which looked at earmarks that were within 2 miles of members' properties. And then, of course, this one focuses on us looking at their financial disclosure forms and looking at what they were doing with legislation and seeing how those potentially intersected. And then today's story, of course, looked at conversations that members had with Treasury Secretary Paulson and somewhat with Geithner, and then the trades that followed.
And Dan, what was your role?
Part of this was trying to get a grip on the vast array of the whole group altogether with regard to trading in stocks that involved companies that they were legislating about at the same time. So we looked at essentially which industries fall within the purview of which committees, and the people who were trading in stocks that affected them. And one way we measured it in particular was by if a company was lobbying on a piece of legislation in front of a member's committee, and the committee member was trading in that company's stock. We thought that was a fairly tight nexus. And my job in this primarily is doing a lot of the computer matching of those kinds of records.
And
Craig is our expert on how hard it is to get congressional ethics laws passed.
That indeed. I've been working on the Stock Act since about 2006, when it was first introduced by Representative Louise Slaughter and Brian Barrett. And throughout the year, trying to get co-sponsors on this legislation to get it. The high point we ever reached was 14 co-sponsors. And literally this year, we were up to 9 co-sponsors. And it was last summer I got a call from Ira Rosen, who's the producer of 60 Minutes, who was just fishing for some ideas to do for their story. And I encouraged him to, pick up this congressional insider trading story, thinking that, we haven't been able to get it when we're here on Capitol Hill. And sure enough, 60 Minutes did a great expose, which I suspect many of you saw. And literally, we went from 9 co-sponsors to about 280 within 1 week following the 60 Minutes show. Nothing in the world could stop the legislation from passing Congress at that point. We didn't even have a bill, by the way, in the Senate that whole period since 2006. And right after the 60 Minutes show, we got 2 bills introduced in the Senate dealing with congressional insider trading. So that made the difference for getting this legislation through.
And Kimberly, where did the numbers come from for your
Well, that's
reporting?
really Dan Keating, who's on with me, and then Dave Fallis, who's just standing by but not on the chat. They're the ones who actually did the numbers. I'd like to follow up quickly with what Craig said. I mean, the stories that we did really focused in on how the Stock Act would not prohibit or prevent any of the activities that we explore in these 2 stories, the one that ran on Sunday and Monday. It does 2 things. It makes it very clear that if a member gets confidential information and they trade on it on Wall Street and make profit off it, confidential information gleaned from the Capitol Hill, that they can now clearly be prosecuted for that. And it changes the disclosure system so that if they are doing stock trades, they have to disclose them every 45 days instead of annually. But what it does not do is prevent any of the activity or prohibit any of the activity that we wrote about in Sunday and Monday stories.
That is true. Could I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
You know, through the course of advocating the final Stock Act, there were a series of amendments to strengthen it. One was offered by Senator Sherrod Brown that would have required all members of Congress to divest themselves of any stock that poses a conflict of interest and to only invest in broad-based mutual funds like the 401k plans. Quite a radical idea, something that, by the way, pretty much applies to the executive branch. But I also knew that if we added that amendment to the Stock Act, you know, we weren't going to get the Stock Act through Congress. So we've ended up with a good bill, not a great bill, but a good bill.
And how do you feel about your role and everything, Dan? Are you proud with what you guys walked away with?
I think it's very important to put a marker down and show people, as Greg was saying, the double standard between what goes on in Congress and what happens with the judicial or executive branch. I think when we've done previous stories on this subject, because we've been doing them for a couple of years, people are consistently surprised. They keep saying, Congressmen can do that, they're allowed to do that. And that's why the very important part about our stories is we're not saying this is illegal. The important thing is we're saying this is problematic and totally legal and allowed under the rules they've created for themselves. So I think I feel good about it because I think we're doing important stories to make people aware of what is allowed and the kind of double standard that they've created.
And so do you think, Craig, have you noticed a little bit of a bump in interest with this series, or do you think this is just something that contributes to a long tail sort of interest in the topic?
Was that question to me? I didn't hear that.
Yeah. I know this isn't. So the 60 Minutes thing had a big impact on what you're doing. How does this affect it? Does it just put it on people's radar more? Or?
This legislation is actually going to have a significant impact. You know, prior to passage of the Stock Act, Congress and congressional staffers widely knew that the insider trading laws just simply didn't apply to them. As a matter of fact, there was a whole private industry that evolved around this called political intelligence consultants that consisted of lobbyists and Wall Street firms literally selling for $10,000 meetings with members of Congress for their clients so that they could find out what type of legislation is pending coming down the pipeline that they could actually trade on and make a profit. This was just unregulated, undisclosed, and so widely abused. Now that we've made it very clear that insider trading is illegal, and even more importantly than that, we've set up a disclosure system so that people like Kimberly and the Washington Post are going to be able to monitor trading activity by members of Congress. It's going to have a significant impact reining in the abuses.
Cool. Do you have any final words you'd like to say, Kimberly?
Well, I had a follow-up question for Craig. I know that you worked really hard to try to get the registration set up for the political intelligence experts who are working the Hill, learning valuable information and then selling it to their investor clients. And I know you tried to get a registration system set up, much like, you know, there's one for lobbyists, for your regular run-of-the-mill lobbyists. That got stripped out of the bill. What do you think the chances are of that someday passing?
It's going to be very difficult to get it in. There was a provision put in the final Stock Act that called upon Congress and the government to conduct a study, including the Congressional Research Service, to come out with a study in 1 year about whether or not a political intelligence industry actually exists. Well, that automatically means for 1 year we're not going to get Congress to even consider any further legislation. So if we get this provision passed as a separate bill, it's going to have to come up 1 year from now, and it's going to be very difficult to try to get Congress to again address this issue. Remember, the whole time since 2006 and before 60 Minutes, we could only get 14 co-sponsors on this legislation. We're going to have to start all over again to get this industry regulated. I want to add, though, that doesn't mean I'm not going to try.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you, guys. How do you conclude one of these things? Take care.